What is up, and welcome back to the Personal Podcast, where today we're going to be talking on a very, very real issue. Now, the topic at hand is George Floyd. A huge incident that has occurred over the last couple of weeks has had huge, major impact across the United States, and I think it's time for us to break it down, causes, effects, and what needs to be happening in the future to try and stop this kind of incident. Now, if you haven't heard what has happened on May 25th, and I'm looking down, I've got notes below, there's about 3 or 4 pages, we've got a lot to go to in today's podcast, and also we will hopefully have something a bit more positive. A sport one should be hopefully coming out very, very soon in the coming days. But for now, a little bit more on the topic. George Floyd was killed on Monday, the 25th of May, by police officers after excessive pressure was put on his neck, videoed by a 17-year-old girl, where he was arrested for no apparent reason, or not no apparent reason, loose reasoning, and then had pressure put on his neck when he was kneeled on by an officer, I believe the name is Chauvin, who was, well, I can't fathom to understand why he would even put himself or take those actions in the first place. Now, I think the first place to start is at the beginning of the arrest with the incidents and how the event came to happen. So, the incident began, or you can go even further back. Floyd, he did have a criminal record, which is something to bear in mind. However, one thing key to note, he had moved away from the city, had been clean for I believe about 10 years, no incidents, and also the officers at hand had no idea, meaning they couldn't have put that prior evidence towards what they were taking the actions in the place. But there was a possibility that a shop owner believed that he had paid with counterfeit money just $20. This whole incident was over $20. That's it. So even for the arrest in the first place, arrest over $20 seems quite extreme to me in the first place. I'm not going to pretend to be any expert on any kind of police matter, but in the first place, an arrest over $20, sure, you can first go up and speak. If they're resisting, then you can surely take further action, but in no circumstances should it turn into a situation where someone's being killed. The jump that has happened there is irrefutable. I mean, even if Floyd did take the action and pay £20 counterfeit, that is nothing compared to actions that other people have taken. And in fact, this officer himself has taken it in the past. What he has done in the past is huge amounts of damage, and he shouldn't be on the force in the first place. We'll get to that later. Floyd makes no effort to resist. He simply gets out his SUV, talks to police, they arrest him, cuff him. Don't really need to see why, but if they need to, maybe that's fair enough if they feel threatened. I'm not going to dig into that bit again. You probably shouldn't be cuffing him in the first place. And then taking him to ground, kneeling on his throat where he couldn't breathe. He said multiple occasions, I believe 11 times, he couldn't breathe. There were surrounding people. Still, nothing was done, and he was killed in the ensuing action. Now, first up, the Minneapolis, I'm going to get that wrong, I don't know, Minneapolis Police Corps has fired the 4 officers that were involved in the event, 2 of which have been named. The main one, the believed murderer, being an officer called Chauvin, who, it's not his first time, it's not his first assault, and I think that is going to come very heavily down on both the police force, Chauvin, and the whole incident that makes it 10 times worse. The fact that it's not just a recurring incident from different people. It's not different people coming in and saying this person's done this multiple times. It's this event, this specific person has done this before. So there was an event in 2008 where a 21-year-old was shot by Chauvin. Nothing was done with the case. It was dropped off. He was suspended for about 6 months with pay, despite having shot a 21-year-old kid who's only a few years older than me. Still a kid, unlikely to be harmed. He claimed that the kid went for a gun, despite the fact they busted into the kid's house with no warning. I don't know whether they had a warrant or anything under it, so very suspicious circumstances there. And furthermore, he's had 20 different reportings of incidents from that one officer alone. Now, firstly, an inquiry has to be made into why he hasn't been suspended and taken off the force permanently in the first place. That's one of the major issues that's come here, suggesting that it's not just an issue at a low-level officer, it's an issue at middle range, top range, throughout the police corps in both Minneapolis and the whole of the US, that these kind of problems are occurring. Now, one positive that can be seen completely separate from this incident is that in mid-2017, Minneapolis had their first black chief of police, which is at least some progress to see. Obviously, it's nowhere near the action that needs to be taken clearly, but it is a little bit of progress. However, Following that, riots had begun. However, they were peaceful protests to start off with. A very key note: they were originally peaceful protests. They turned into riots, and that's where things got messy. Places have been attacked, stores robbed. I know there's been a Target that has had critical damage done to it, robbed. And the question that needs to be raised is, are these riots necessary? And some would argue yes, and I think there is a cause to say that they do have positive impact, the wrong word, but I think it kind of is in this situation a positive impact in the way that they're forcing the hand, and it's disgraceful for the matter that it's taken till, I believe, Thursday, you're saying this probably on Monday, Thursday, 3 days after the incident, before the police finally say, we will look into this, we will say. And the fact that nothing, I didn't hear anything until Wednesday, shows that they tried to brush it under the table for the first 2 days, and it's probably not the only incident. I've got a couple of cases that were never brought up in the past that were similar incidents, neither thankfully ended in death, but similar cases where racism has occurred in the police corps. And it's awful to see, and it continued even through the riots. So earlier today, when I'm recording this on Thursday, a well-known reporter, this isn't just somebody who's like me, if I walked up in the street, someone said nobody would know me, yeah? This is a well-known reporter, a well-known black reporter, was arrested earlier today, despite having identified himself, had made no impact, done no attacks on the riots. It's clear, you look at his Twitter, he was tweeting up until early Thursday in the UK, and then he stopped tweeting because he has been arrested, despite the fact, firstly, his white associate, his friend, was let free, despite the fact his colleague also said he's done nothing, if you're going to take him, take me as well. It shows the continued issue, and I think it's gonna become very difficult to resolve, because what's happening is these two forces, the police force and the black community, getting pulled further and further apart, creating more and more conflict, when what needs to be done is finding ways to mend and rebuild unity rather than trying to pull each other apart further. And there needs to be someone in the middle at the moment to be trying to do that kind of action, and Jimenez is exactly that kind of person. So this arrest is hugely damaging in itself, because Jimenez, I'd said a second ago about the person that can create unity in the middle, he's bringing these two sides together. He's not going to go out and attack the cops, I don't believe he would anyway, and slander them, those that are necessary, because you've got to remember, 99% of the police force are not, hopefully, I would fingers crossed, most are not going to be racist, but it's that 1%, and it's that 1% that has a huge impact that needs to be jammed out as quickly as possible, and clearly hasn't been fixed as of yet, despite repeated issues over the last 10, 20, 30, 40, however far you want to go back. So, continued issues. But we're going to move on to a couple of key questions now as we head on. And firstly is, what should be done to avoid this and stop this situation in the short term? Now, firstly, short term, this may run over 2 camera seconds, the police chief needs to have Chauvin arrested and probably had put on trial instantly. Now, I know he's been arrested. I know he's originally I don't believe he has been arrested, actually. I know he's been fired. I don't know for certain whether he's been arrested as of yet, and whether he's gone to trial. That has not happened yet, but it needs to happen. They need to be making a direct statement saying that those responsible will be put on trial immediately, because it won't fix everything. It won't fix everything, but maybe it can at least see that those, because what they're fighting for at the beginning, obviously there's two things that they're fighting for. Firstly, they're fighting for justice for Floyd, and secondly, they're fighting over a major issue. So, whilst the police and the US government cannot fix the issue of the core racist issue, they can't just click their fingers and solve that. The issue they can fix is the Chauvin issue and the event in itself, which is one simple core action, which is to put at least Chauvin on trial. Now, obviously, life imprisonment needs to be done. Some are calling for the death penalty. I believe the death penalty still exists in America, which is questionable to itself, and it has its merits. It has its merits, because it would make a very extreme example that this racism will not be tolerated, and it needs to be stamped out immediately, and would certainly have an impact on the police corps. However, at the same respect, does taking one life warrant taking another life? I think the answer is probably no. As awful as it is, I think killing Chauvin is not the answer. Life imprisonment definitely is. He should be arrested and done for life. The other three, it gets a lot harder, because I was watching the Impulsive podcast and I saw Mike talking about something called the blue line, where officers don't like to tread on each other's feet, in a very light way of putting it. Should they have responded almost definitely yes, but it gets difficult. They haven't actually made any actions, and bystanding is the most complicated area of a crime to solve, because the person that's done the crime, it's easy to see once you have the evidence stacked against them. The victim is easy to see. The bystanders is a very difficult, blurred line in the middle. I think that's the issue with a lot of these things. Chauvin is quite simple. That's black and white, not as in a colour aspect, as in he's done something wrong, needs to be punished. The people that were bystanders is a different situation. Can you life in prison then? A lot harder in that scenario. But you've got to continue looking forward. And the next question is to the riots. Now, firstly, I think some people are questioning, are the riots a positive thing? Positive? No. They're damaging in the respect that they are obviously creating huge damage in itself, which will take a long time and a lot of cost to repair. They are also tearing apart people's lives who haven't done anything in the situation, but at the same respect, the one way to get their attention, they had tried peaceful protest. These issues should have been fixed regardless before any protest was needed in the first place, and then they've then come to these actions. So I think it's a sliding scale. They haven't just gone from 1 to 100. It's a sliding scale, and I think they've reached a stage where riots need to be. I think Talia Mar actually made a very good point on this. Not the most political figure, but it made a very good point that if nothing else has worked, then surely the riot is warranted in that situation. It has been warranted in respect that only now that the riot has occurred has the police responded. Now, one man that's having an absolute nightmare with this is Trump, because Trump has put out 2 tweets, I believe even Twitter have taken down, which shows that the amount of hate in them, I haven't seen them, but it must have been fairly high, and I believe he was threatening to call it in the army. Now, I believe, as of reading right now, the National Guard will be brought in as a third night of rioting is expected. Now, the question here is, should the army be brought in? I think it's difficult, because on the one hand, the riots need to be stopped, but there's 2 ways the riots will end. You've got one, you've got police force. However, that could, in the long term, and actually the riots going longer, as clashes are created, more violence. There's already been 1 death, I believe, on Wednesday. More death and more bloodshed is not the answer. People are getting hurt in many situations. And maybe in this scenario, the best thing to do is just to wait it out. Let the anger abate and try and fix things peacefully, but without using minimal violence, because the violence, I mean, it's pinging back and forth. So they say we shouldn't respond with violence killing Chauvin, but then they respond with violence to the rioters. So it's a little bit hypocritical in that respect, and it's very difficult to fix all these scenarios. So at the end of the day, it's quite simple. They have 2 options. They've got appeasement and they've got oppression. That's what it boils down to. Appeasing them, they let Chauvin get arrested. Obviously, Chauvin's house is currently surrounded. And it would make, to be honest, a real positive show if the police themselves would go in and arrest Chauvin in a public manner, because that would lay down exactly what's happening here in not leaving anything up to chance. But in the same respect, they can go for the oppression route, which will stop the rioting, stop the violence, in the respect that if they can oppress them and arrest enough people to stop the attacks and disincentivise further attacks, that will be beneficial. However, if it backfires, it could lead to more violence, and also you've got to think long term. Short term, it may end the violence and the attacks. Long term, it adds to more prejudice, more splits, and more divisions amongst the country, which is exactly what they currently don't need. And I think at the moment, I'd put here, is everybody's fired up for a fight. I think even Trump's fired up for a fight, which is no, he's always seems that, but it's something that everybody is ready to go to blows in this situation. A death has happened. A second death has, of course, happened on Wednesday. Further deaths is not going to bring any benefits or any progress. Now, we're going to move off the short-term effects of what they should do there. Personally, I think probably just allowing it to abate in itself is the best solution, because at the end of the day, there are always going to be those that are most radical. That's never going to change. There's going to be more radical people that will want to continue the riots for a prolonged period of time. There will be those in the community that obviously realise these riots cannot go on forever, and many will be seeing that the riots have had the impact that they needed, and the effect of the riot, they're looking for the riots, it's not to cause and create the violence. They're not, most of these people, I would assume, other than maybe the 3rd precinct's been attacked, are especially want to go out of the way to create violence. The reason they're needing to create this violence is to caused the US to respond. They need a response. It's a little bit like the Irish, if you've done history, in that as much as all their rebellions failed, the public perception which changed, and that's the key thing. Public perception is critical. Now that the public is on the side, partially and fairly on the rioters' side in this situation, it means that the police have a very difficult deal. They're in a very difficult situation and have to follow in the rioters' lead. But moving off that and looking to evidence of further issues. So we've already pointed out, obviously, the death of Floyd and obviously the arrest of Jimenez, but those aren't the only issues that have occurred in the last 10 years. These are all. So, firstly, this is just based in the Minneapolis Police Court. I've identified two major cases that have been identified. The first one being an officer called Rod Webber, who in 2015 threatened to break a black kid's legs for no reason other than when he tried to resist arrest. Rod Webber's reasoning for arresting him was that he just felt like it. He was fired. I think that's difficult. Should more extreme action be taken in that scenario? Probably. You've got to think, at the end of the day, you boil it down. If it's the roles reversed, yeah, that's what it boils down to. If the black kid had come along and threatened to, or broken the officer's legs, or threatened to break the officer's legs, what would have been the police's response in that scenario? That's the response that needs to be had to Webber, if not further, because he's supposed to be the one protecting in this scenario in the first place. He's the officer. He's the one that should be taking the responsibility, regardless, in this scenario. So, first up, police shouldn't be trying to go to blows unless it is especially necessary, which is obviously a major issue. But that's not the only case that has occurred. There was an officer called Mike Spanning. I'm not sure whether he was the officer or the victim in this scenario. You'd have to further research. That's gone from my mind. But in 2013, Spanning was the victim. 3 officers beat and attacked Spanning and his nephew for, again, no reasoning outside a bar. 2 of them were fired. The 3rd case was dropped, and that 3rd case is the most crucial of the lot. This happened in 2013, 7 years ago. Very recent in history in the grand scheme of things. I know 2013 seems a long, long time ago. I'd have been 11. But in the grand scheme of things, 2013 is the flash of an eye. It's nothing. So you've got to look at that 3rd case that got dropped, and also at the 20 reports that have been ignored on Chauvin, that these issues are not being attacked at the helm, and that I think the police have to take some responsibility in the fact that they should have pushed on these issues and been, I can't think of the word, but they should have fixed these issues in the first place rather than having an event like this cause the issue. Now, obviously, this event is a major history turning point, and what they do from here is crucial, and what happens in the short term is obviously important, but what's more important is what happens in the long term. So in terms of long-term solutions, the first and most important thing is that this isn't forgotten. That's the first and most important thing. This needs to be something that isn't just left dead and buried 2 weeks after this event. It needs to be brought up next year. It needs to be brought up 2 years from now. It's an event and a person that needs to be remembered for the injustice that has happened, and also what needs to be remembered, not just the injustice towards Floyd, but also the actions that will be taken against those that act out of action, such as Chauvin, such as Webber, in these scenarios. What needs to be put, and it needs to be a harsh line that is put in place. But the first thing that needs to be done, long-term solutions, is allowing and encouraging people of colour to take in more places of power. So you need more officers of colour, more judges of colour, more lawyers of colour. Across the board, the bureaucracy needs to see more people of colour and not just all white, because that's the first issue. When you have, and it's not just coming down to simply that, obviously, if there's more people of colour, they have an impact, but also the people seeing that there's people, if people of colour who aren't in an affluent area and aren't in an area of power, maybe if they're seeing that, and those that are writing, if they're seeing that change is being made, that will obviously have the impact. And also say to them, if this person can make it here, and this person can make this impact. It's like someone like Martin Luther King. Martin Luther's a very different person for the history student, but Martin Luther King, who came up and did all these great things, not going to pretend to be any expert on all the stuff he did. He's inspired those to take the further steps and to progress and make the progress that has been seen. Further actions such as that need to be taken, and the first step is to get more people into power as officers, judges and lawyers. As I just said, in even areas such as the news, someone like Jimenez is crucial when you break it down, to be honest, in the respect that he can have such an impact shaping people's minds in the way that what he's doing is such an important role, almost as important as the officers, in that the actions that he takes will affect, inspire, and have further impacts down the line on the next generation. So he is a person that can now play a very crucial and very important role in all these issues. The next key thing, it's not cops versus colour. That should not be the issue. It's not blue versus black. It should be one unity fixing this issue. The common enemy, it's quite simple. At the moment, the black community is angry at the cops, and the cops clearly have some resentment, at least towards the communities rioting. But the issue is they are not supposed. They're not enemies. The common enemy is Chauvin and those that are doing the racist actions, not each other. And that's something that needs to be realised hopefully sooner rather than later. And bringing more people, again, going back to the point of colour, into the force will have a huge impact. However, that's obviously difficult because one big thing is education standards and where people can see where they can go in the future. So if people are growing up in a poor neighbourhood where crime is common, gang mentality is common, now I'm not going to pretend I'm in anywhere near that kind of a situation, so obviously it's difficult on a physical level. On a theoretical level, it has been proved many times that mixed neighbourhoods are the most beneficial because it allows those at the top to see where they can be, and also more importantly says to those who maybe grew up in a less affluent lifestyle that they can make it to the top. And I think that's the most important thing that needs to happen, is you've got to focus on the future. The future is where it is key. You want to be improving these schools, improving the lives of the young people of colour, and the area and environment that they are growing up in. That is so, so important headed into the future, in the making sure as many opportunities, rights, the whole lot, equal. That's what it needs to be. It's what it comes down to at the end of the day. And equal is another big point that needs to be come along to. And myself, I'm not a person of colour. It's often difficult for us to get involved in the matter. And one thing that has been raised a number of times on Twitter is Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter. And I think, to be honest, All Lives Matter, yes, obviously, all lives matter. That's quite plain and obviously simple. But I think what it comes down to is sometimes people get offended by saying, it's not this. My camera stopped for a second, but we're back. And they're right. It's not the same situation, because the way to think about it is, and I've written this down quite literally. If one of your hands is broken, or your arm is broken, again, not a medical expert, if your arm is broken, it's in a cast, you're going to pay more attention and give more protection to the arm that's in the cast than your arm that's just fine. That's natural, and that's the same situation here. The black community is the one that is coming under the pressure, being under threat. Those of us that are safer shouldn't be paying attention and saying, we need equal help, because if you've got one broken arm, yeah, and I'm not saying the black community is broken, that's not the analogy I'm making here. The black community is the one under attack, yeah? If that arm is broken, you don't know then say, can I stick this, my other arm, my healthy arm in the cast as well? That is not what happens. You prioritise on the area that has issues, and that's what needs to be done. So obviously all lives matter, but then that's like saying, don't jump off a cliff, or that's anything. Just don't do something stupid. Don't touch an electric fence is a really bad example because it's not extremely dangerous, but don't tickle a lion, I don't know. It's very, very different. One arm has an issue, the other arm doesn't. The one that needs to be focused on is the arm that has the issue. And that's not to say, this is a very key standpoint, the black community has problems. Everybody has problems. That's firstly a major issue that is obvious, but it's different areas, and the problem areas that need to be focused on. This is the current and key area that needs to be solved. And what I think is difficult, and I think a lot of other communities find tough, is that obviously I think partly the black community don't necessarily want the help. And I don't think that's because they're arrogant, because it's in the same respect that if you're doing something and someone comes along and interferes, you don't always want to help. But I think maybe that's the best way, and it's not because the black community is weak, it's because as a whole global group, black, white, Hispanic, whatever, we are stronger as one group than we are as segregated areas where the black community is fighting for this issue but the white community is doing nothing. The way that these issues will become resolved is when the whole come together as one, and I think that's the very much key issue that needs to be seen here is that yes, the black community can have a huge impact. Yes, as such, they need to be the ones leading the charge, but they need the support and the backup of everyone else to see this is the issue. If everyone is united as one, then the issue will be resolved a lot quicker and a lot smoother than maybe it has been in the past. Now, I don't think I have much more to say on the whole issue, other than I'll probably leave some sites below giving information as to anything. I don't know whether there's any donation pages as of yet, but apologies for a slightly more somber topic, but I thought this is an issue that needs to be gone over, raising the different points and talking about what can be done to fix it in the future. I think the key thing is unity. Unity is the key thing. If there's one thing you take away, unity is the way to fix this problem. It's not black versus cops. It's not black versus white. We need to be going as one to stop those that are creating issues, continuing these racial problems. And I think that's all that we have to say. Now, I said earlier in the podcast, I will have something positive about. There's Williams to talk about. There's the return of football, which I'm very, very excited to see. But for now, it's a little bit somber, but goodbye.